that's part of that world building, that you create a world that has its own set of rules for each of the unique things about it. And one of the problems with the later Star Wars movies is that they have a preset world that has some level of rules to it, and then just start going haywire. Welcome. This is A Lost Plot, the podcast where cinematic plots are taken apart piece by piece to determine what makes that movie great or why it has been forgotten today. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot. I'm your host, Maverick, here with our guest, Avalon.
Hello, hola, konnichiwa, leho.
Today we are discussing what makes a movie worth watching, and specifically today we are looking at the idea of world building. So this is something that is almost the context, the basis of the world that you're looking at, what makes it believable, what makes it understandable for you as someone who's sometimes not even seen anything like this world. How do those things affect the fundamentals of the story and make it a different story, a better story, a unique story, however the director or the writers want to take that. So it's so fundamental that sometimes it's passed over or given, but I think if you look at it specifically, it can add a lot of unique stuff to the story. So before getting too carried away, Alan, what do you think the fundamentals for a good world building are?
Well, I would say obviously one of the first things that comes to mind is style and just the general flavor or feel of the movie or story. I mean, if you think about it, just in a way, the world building sometimes helps make a story more unique, make it stand apart from the others out there.
Right.
It's what makes Lord of the Rings stand apart from other fantasy stories out there. It's like you think of Middle Earth, there is a very specific thing that comes to mind, very specific ideas and things that, because it's what the world building of Middle Earth does. It's like
Right.
it gives the context and the story for the basis of the story of Lord of the Rings. And so it's like when you think of Lord of the Rings, you don't think of Narnia, you don't think of George R. R. Martin's story world. You think
Right.
I'm blanking on that one right now, but like you think of Middle Earth, like there is this very specific, unique style that comes to mind. And if that's being said, it's not just fantasy, sci-fi as well. What sets The Expanse apart from other science fiction is like there's a very specific ideas and very specific themes and things that go on in The Expanse that make it stand apart from other sci-fi. It's just the way the ships work, the way space battles operate, the way the politics go on between planets, like what happens, the back dealings, the corporations. It's like all these different things. It's like when you think of The Expanse, for those who are familiar with the book series or the show, it's like it isn't the same as Star Wars or Star Trek. It's like, or even Interstellar or something like that. Like you think The Expanse stands apart because it has excellent world building that makes it have a unique feel. And it's like, I
Right.
think that's what world building should do. It's like, whether that be something high and lofty, like The Expanse or Lord of the Rings, or something simpler or smaller, like John Wick, where it's like it's kind of our world, but it's got these unique like little organizations or things at the side.
Right.
So
And that's the thing, especially because you see, you have the people who are the Star Trek nerds, or you have the people who are the Lord of the Rings nerds, or you have the people who are the Star Wars nerds, right? And there is a sense in which it's not uncommon for those worlds to actually be combined in a single nerd, right? Because they understand, they will nerd out about different things about each one because their worlds are so uniquely developed that that is interesting on its own, completely separate from anything else. It's the copies that people most often forget, the ones that come after those first ones, and the fact that Star Trek stuck around in the cultural zeitgeist, or the fact that Star Wars is still a cultural phenomenon today, or the fact that you have those diehard Lord of the Rings people. The fact that those exist is a testament to their worlds being so unique.
I mean, that's not the only thing I think that impacts the story. I mean, that's definitely a big part of it. But I'd also say it creates context where it's like the stories take place in these worlds. It kind of like it definitely impacts how the story is told, what happens. Just like, for example, I mean, Harry Potter, like, for example, the world has a heavy impact on the story of Harry Potter, every single book, where it's like, it just how wizards interact with humans, with the muggles, the rules, the societies, just all the like the shadowy stuff that goes on within the wizarding world. It's just like it
Right.
creates the backbone for like why Harry Potter has the life he has, why these things happen, why he goes to Hogwarts, and like the basis of all these things. That gives the framework for the story, gives us an idea of like why these things are happening in the story. And the same is with John Wick, where it's like you kind of have this backbone, where it's like the reason the story is happening more or less is because of these shadowy organizations. I know we don't like this movie on this podcast, but I was just, but the one thing John Wick is good at is world building. I will give it that, and I think because with the
Well,
introduction
no,
of
I'd agree
Continental,
with that.
yeah, the
100%.
Continental, even like the even just the mentions of like the Doctor, these mafia groups and whatnot. It just like it creates this almost believability interaction. Like it's like okay, that's really interesting. Like how it all comes together. It creates this background, this backdrop that the story can take place in, and it's kind of believable because it's so well established.
That's actually the great thing about the John Wick movie, honestly, is one, they do so well with the fight scenes, which is part of the culture of the assassins. That's what the word I'm looking for. Just how
Mm-hmm.
well and skilled they are within the Continental group. That is a testament to that world building, and that speaks out as one of the marks for the movie. So, if anything, no, that John Wick's a great example of that. That's one of the only things I think is good about that movie. Yeah, no, I think the way it plays out in the movie is significant. I mean, the very fact that Lord of the Rings is here we go. Lord of the Rings is a such a great story is not just because it has such a rich historical quote unquote, because it's all made up, but historical backdrop for the whole story. There's also the fundamental pieces such as the Ring of Power, right? The existence of Balrogs, the existence of the wraiths, right?
Mm-hmm.
The existence of orcs, etc., 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 that play fundamentally into this clash between the evil and the good that exists in this universe.
Mm. Yeah. If we want, yeah, the if another thing I would say, I mean, aside from creating context, the other thing a world building should do is establish, like, kind of help with the plot where it needs to, like, fill in the plot holes, fill in like the what places where the story is weak, because if it's set in a fantasy world or science fiction world or something, you are going to have to do some world building for it to be believable. Because if you don't, you have a stupid story or a silly story or something like that. And I would say a good example of a story that fails to do enough world building is Tenet. Tenet, I think, has a decent idea behind it. I think it actually has a compelling, like the idea of going like reversing time, going backward. I think it's a compelling idea, but Christopher Nolan did not do squat when it came to world building for that movie. It was like very like or minimal at best. And to be fair, if you look at all his movies, he's not good at world building. He's good at creating interesting ideas, but like even if you look at Inception and other movies, like he gives you the basics, and it's not a like Inception's not bad. Don't get me wrong, but Inception, like like when you look at the basic world building of Inception, it's just the base elements. There is no complicated idea, like complicated world building. It's just like, okay, dream hackers exist. There is these different things, elements to dream hackers, the different specialties. We're not showing like organizations of them. We're not showing other versions of dream hackers or anything like that. We're not shown like how do they defend against dream hackers? Like how do you get training for that? Like there's like all these different things you could have explained and it would have built up the world more. They don't do. He doesn't show that. But
Well, so
in,
you don't always want to show every piece of your world, just
no, no, of course
because
not. Yeah,
I do like Inception a lot, so
no,
I
I
I
do
do feel
too.
like that example. You're not.
So I'm just
I
saying
do think you're
the
wrong. I'm
only
not gonna say
reason.
you're not wrong because I do think you're wrong, but it's. So here's the thing with Inception, right? They don't want you don't want to always explain everything, right?
Oh, of
Sometimes it's
course not.
better
No,
for some
I
things
agree
to
with
be
that.
left in the dark. So
Mm-hmm.
the question then becomes, does that need to be explained?
Mm-hmm.
And
No, I would just argue. My point wasn't that Inception was bad. My point
uh-huh,
was that Christopher Nolan isn't good at world building. And like, if you look, I
right.
question like what of his movies show he's good at world building. I'd say like if you like Interstellar, Memento, I mean, not that some of those needed a whole lot of world building to begin with. It just was
Uh-huh.
like, okay, just the base elements. And like, if you look at some of them too closely, you could probably find plot holes here and there, like that aren't really fully supported. I just say, Inception is a
Right.
good movie and I love it, but I mean, I would just say that it doesn't make Christopher Nolan a good world builder, is what I was saying. And Tenet, another of
Interesting.
his movies, is like I liked the idea of Tenet, but it needed a lot more world building to it to explain how things worked, to explain how like the technology and such worked and such, and just to better define the conflict. But he
Uh-huh.
didn't do that. And so the movie is really stupid, kind of silly and unbelievable now because it's like, okay, there's a lot of things you skipped over for this like this whole movie. It's kind of
Interesting.
silly at the end because of that.
Uh-huh. Well, so I'm gonna
So,
be honest right now.
mhm.
Huge no on me, especially because I do like a lot of Christopher Nolan movies. I haven't actually seen Tenet yet.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, so I'm surprised you didn't spoil it for me yet, but that's the one I need to watch pretty soon.
Yeah.
But I have heard that it's not the best of his movies. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
why I haven't watched it yet, to be honest.
It has some
I
great scenes, but it's
right,
as a movie and a complete story, there are some plot holes and some points that are just like, oh my word, like it's glaring obvious he didn't do enough work here. And there's some things if you think too
right,
much about it, it becomes stupid. It's just like you need the this. How can this exist in this world without this or without that? And it's just like
right,
it becomes for me. It became very frustrating after a certain point. Thinking about it, I was like, okay, this movie could have been good, but it fails because not enough was done.
right.
On the
No,
flip side, like as far as like how a story should support and fill plot points, I mean, in a way, Star Wars, its world building does kind of help to fill in plot points more or less. I mean, with the ideas of like the Force and like supernatural powers and whatnot, or just like
right.
how some of
Well, they
that.
use that so much it becomes a cop out in later
Well, it does
movies.
become a cop out, but it's not
Yeah,
like, but it exists within the universe, and it's not like okay, this doesn't. It's not like oh, we're pulling something out thin air. Like they do establish the Force as this mystical power force, like mystical thing that exists that they can draw
right,
from. So it's like
right.
it does
Well,
kind of fill in the gaps at certain points because it exists. Like so, world building is done to establish it. So
right.
that.
So let's go off of that in a second. I have
Mm-hmm.
to go back and say, because I'm a stupid stickler right now. Okay, once again, I think that you're wrong on Inception. I think that he explains the right amount, and that the things that he doesn't explain, he doesn't necessarily need to explain,
Oh,
but
he
there are
doesn't.
very perfectly there's perfectly good reasons for why those things could have existed.
I don't
But
understand what
we'll
you don't
review that.
understand, but okay.
We'll review that. Like I don't think the fact that someone wasn't trained, like they didn't explain how they got trained against
Mm-hmm.
people getting into their dreams is that
Mm-hmm.
significant of an issue.
Yeah.
I think it's a simple enough explanation.
Mm-hmm. No, it
Um,
probably is. No, I'm not.
but,
I don't
but
think I'm not trashing on Inception here. Believe me,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not. I
No,
just.
no. I just had to put that out there. Going back to Star Wars though, there is a sense in which
Oh.
your the universe itself
Mm-hmm.
has these different things about it, right? They can be mysterious elements, they cannot, but there has to be some level of quote unquote ground rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where those powers, even if they're somewhat mysterious, you have to know to some degree how they work or interact with the world that they live in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so for the Force, right, the Force is this supernatural power that everyone knows the Jedi and the Sith draw on to then gain some of their power, whether that's their agility or their ability to wield their lightsaber or their ability to force push people or shoot lightning bolts or whatever it is. That is all drawn from the Force, right? And there is some understanding of balance there and what balance is the thing they're trying to achieve. It's not super explained, but there are these general rules, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's part of that world building, that you create a world that has its own set of rules for each of the unique things about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the one of the problems with the later Star Wars movies is that they have a preset world that has some level of rules to it and then just start going haywire.
Mm-hmm.
So they have examples of Mace Windu and these other people who are the extremely skilled individuals, or Anakin Skywalker, who's supposed to be the quote unquote greatest force wielder, whatever, of all time, right? You see them as the pinnacle, and this is the limit of their skills, right? And then they go into the next movies, and not only is it just a little bit above, but it's so far above with so many new powers that you've never seen before. I can't even fathom how that still makes sense in the current universe, because the Force is not something that just grows new powers, right?
Yeah.
It you could argue that hypothetically those powers already existed with the Force, right?
Hmm.
That Rey's able to just jump into someone else's universe and start slashing people and whatnot out of nowhere. Um, and you can go back to lore and try to argue some of those things or not, or force projections or whatever. But
Hmm.
I think it's very hard to claim completely new power after completely new power after completely new power over and over again and still be a believable story.
Yeah.
So you really have to set the boundaries for what the world is and the building of the that world, and then stay within those bounds relatively. You can break a couple rules, and when you do that, you can create that intrigue, that suspense. Maybe something existed that we didn't
Hmm.
know existed before, things like that. But you can't abuse that. And there was a sense in which they abused that, such
Hmm.
as saying, "Oh, no one can know where Exeter is," and then they are able to just fly there instantly, or fly to the right planet and say, "I had a feeling," or the Force, or whatever, and you say, "Shut up! I don't want to hear it again." um,
Hmm.
or hyperspace hopping, which is the stupidest rule violation. This is the clearest world building violation I could think of. Okay, do you know in episode 4 they do a long series of calculations to try to escape the Death Star for one, and to jump into the Alderaan system? Right, this is not a simple thing to jump through hyperspace. They show it's very meticulous and it's very complicated. And if you get one thing wrong, this is literally what Han Solo says. If you get one thing wrong, you're gonna lop right into an asteroid or into another planet or whatever. So, based on the rules they set out for how hyperdrives and hyperspace works, the idea of hyperspace hopping, or whatever it was in episode 9 at the very beginning, where they're going boom, hyperspace boom, second after second after second, is just fundamentally against the rules they had set out previously. And they just, especially if you see what they were jumping through, which was like literal glaciers. So
Hmm.
that's enough about that, because I will go on a much further rant when I actually
Yeah.
review that movie. But suffice it to say, there is a whole lot of BS in 7, 8, and
No,
9
yeah. I agree with
because
the
of this.
point.
Because of this.
Yeah, no, and I think you have to stick with the rules. If you establish rules for the world, you should stick with those rules. You can't just
Mm-hmm.
change the rules on the fly because you want to, or because you want to tell, oh, I want the story to be this. Like, because then you've created a new universe. You've created a new story. Like, it's
Right.
not the same universe that we've come to love in such way. I mean, in a way, actually, another world that came to mind just now when we were having that rant. And I've only read the first book series, by the way, of this, but Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn trilogy. I'm not sure if
Okay.
you've read that series,
No.
but because the world building in that story, like he establishes the rules fairly early on in the first book with the use of allomancy, or the use of the metals, where it's like these people, special people, like individuals, some of them can ingest like flakes of metal or something in like
Okay.
dissolvable into liquid. And what happens is it creates this source of power for them. Like each metal does something different. It's not like you get unlimited power with each one. It's like this one can do this, this one can do this, this one can do this, and then there's 4 metals introduced, and then there's the counter metals which like counteract those metals, and it's like
Interesting.
so it's like he creates the system of powers. Like these are the rules, and so when it follows the story, you begin to realize, okay, these are how the metals affect each other. This is how these people can affect this person and this person, and it just like it gives you the rules, and it doesn't deviate from those rules because it
Right.
establishes them and it follows them to a T, and it makes the
Right.
world building so excellent as far as that goes in that world, in that universe. It's like the Mistborn books. It's like you have a very consistent world, and it's believable, and it's unique, and it's different. So if they
Right.
ever make Mistborn into a movie series, I'd be excited. But that's beside the
Right.
point.
And let me just clarify. I think I did say this, but I want to reiterate this: is
Mhm.
that previously, just because you show something new about an element that you've already introduced does not mean that's not okay. That
Mhm.
can be okay. There are a couple of things you have to be clear on, though. One, that has to be a natural extension of something that already exists, or
Hmm.
two, there has to be a good explanation for that.
Hmm.
So when you're going to introduce this new power, it can't be just like, oh my goodness, I found this new power. Aren't I so awesome? Like Ray Skywalker does, Ray Palpatine, whatever the frick you want to call her. You can't just do that. You have to have some explanation of, oh, there was this thing that was added. So, the ability, for example, of Aaron Yeager to transform from a Titan into a Titan that has armor is because he literally drinks a capsule of armor-inducing Titan power.
Hmm.
There's that was for the nerds. You're welcome. Like and subscribe. But the other, there was a fundamental piece that they introduced to show why he gained such a huge additional power, rather than
Hmm.
just being able to do it out of nowhere. The third thing that I think is an exception to this rule, usually you want to have some explanation on the back end for this one, but you don't always. I'm thinking about this in my head. I'm kind of thinking it through as I say it. So this one I'm not sure about, but when you have something go wrong,
Hmm.
that's okay. So it's okay generally to have something go from bad to worse and that be explainable. Why? Because we see that in our world all the time, right? You lose your car keys, you get back to your car. Oh my goodness, my car got broken into, right? Those types of things, they're not ideal, but they happen, right? And so the idea of something going from bad to worse without any cause of your own or without a clear explanation is a natural byproduct in our universe. And so that idea of unchained chaos
Hmm.
existing in even the powers of the world that you're dropped into in this story is more acceptable. It's not acceptable to just give them a freebie,
Hmm.
like the Greeks
Well,
did
it's
with
like,
the Deus
yeah,
Ex Machina,
yeah. I was just thinking that Deus Ex Machina. Yeah. Hmm. No, you're right.
but
Well, it's like
yeah,
in a way where it's like you want to see the characters overcome the things presented in front of them, the problems, the trials, the obstacles, more or less. Like you want to see them succeed. If you give them a freebie as a storyteller, you're almost like as you said, like the gods looking down on the story, and then you just like solve the problem by giving them a free item or free this or that.
yeah,
It's not the same thing when you throw another
you get a
obstacle.
free power.
It's not like if you do the opposite, where it's like you throw another obstacle at them, you've made the story more interesting because now it's like, oh shoot, now it just got worse. Like the stakes have been raised. Things are like, oh, not now what are they gonna do? Like it doesn't have to explain the bad things that happen all the time. Like that it's a natural byproduct. But you do have to like there has to be a framework for understanding like why all the way things work, like how the heroes are able to do what they do, and vice versa, and like yeah,
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
even with all this stuff about world building, I think another thing that should be stated very clearly here is that world building is very fascinating, very fun, and as I said, it does make worlds unique, stories unique, and that not. But at the same time, story is king. World building is not. World building is the supplement. It is the supporting structure, but it is not the like. It should not be like the main pole, the main pillar that's holding everything up. So I would
Right.
say like if you should have like if you don't have a good story, uh, all that world building is flashy. It can be distracting, and in some cases it works, as in the case of John Wick. But it's not. It's hiding the fact that you have a poorly written story.
Well, and that's the thing, right? If you see yourself where you don't have those clear rules in place that chain down the storyline itself, then and make sure that they're not inconsistent,
Mm-hmm.
then you draw back and make a world that's more similar to the world that we have today, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could John Wick be put in a completely fantasy universe? Yes, but it'd probably be less cohesive than it already was. Is the world building, so having the world building fundamentally concise and tied down to making sure everything is, like you said, wrapped up with a bow, right? You can't have flaws, because once you do, if they're big enough, they will tear your story apart. Well, that's all we got for today. We hope you all enjoyed. If you're watching this on the podcast apps, please give us a subscribe, leave us a review. It really helps us out. And yeah, if you're watching on YouTube or any of the other streaming channels, be sure to give us a subscribe as well. Give us a little thumbs up, and we will see you all next time.
If you have a movie you want reviewed or have some feedback to give us, send us a message at alostplot.com. If you like this podcast, please leave us a review. It really helps other people find our podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode and look forward to seeing you back with us next time. See you then.